everyone, I hope y'all are having a great day, and today I'll be reviewing Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, although reviewing is a little bit of a generous term for what I predict will happen in this video, which is just me fangirling and gushing about how much I love this book. Before I go into the book and my thoughts on it, I do want to do a little bit of a story time. Also, people are mowing the lawn outside. It's very loud. I'm sorry if you can hear that. Okay, so my copy of Six of Crows is signed, and so is my copy of Crooked Kingdom. And speaking of Crooked Kingdom, I've actually already read this book too, because normally I read a book and then I wait like a few days, maybe a week to review it just so that I can like simmer in my thoughts. But in this case, during that time, during that simmer period, I immediately jumped into the sequel and finished this too. And I thought about making a series review, like reviewing the duology as a whole, but then I thought the video would probably be like 2,000 hours long, and so I decided to just review these books individually. But the difficult thing about that, after having read both of the books, is that when I get into the spoiler section of Six of Crows, I'm scared I'm gonna accidentally spoil things that happen in Crooked Kingdom. I'm gonna try my best not to, but if I slip up, I'm sorry, that's just a warning. But back to the storytime part. By the way, I'm gonna try to put some annotation on the screen so that you can click it and skip the storytime part and go straight to the review. But anyway, Leigh Bardugo came to Nashville, Tennessee for her Crooked Kingdom book tour. In case you didn't know, I go to school in Nashville, and so does Jenna from Jenna Claire K. At least she did, she graduated. And Jenna reached out to me and she was like, hey, I see that you're in Nashville. You should come with me and the rest of the Nashville booktubers to this Leigh Bardugo signing. And I was like, sure. This is actually my first book signing ever. So that was exciting, even though I hadn't read Six of Crows yet. Actually, the only Leigh Bardugo book that I'd read at this point was Shadow and Bone, and even that was many, many years ago because I read it as an arc before it came out. But anyway, at this Crooked Kingdom book signing, Leigh Bardugo on her table had a bunch of playing cards laid out face down like this. And each of these playing cards has one of the 6 main characters on them. And when you went up to get your book signed, you drew a playing card, and if on your playing card you had a character named Wylan, you won this exclusive Six of Crows poster. And in retrospect, it's a little interesting that Wylan was the winning card because Wylan is actually probably the most irrelevant of the 6 characters. Like, he doesn't even have his own chapters in this first book. But I digress. So the Nashville booktubers were pretty early on in this signing line, but even so many people were drawing Wylan cards and these posters were going so fast. We were pretty early in line, but by the time that I got my book signed, there was only one poster left. So I went up, I got my book signed. I was like, hey, good to be here. This is my first signing, actually. I didn't have much to say to Leigh Bardugo because, like I said, I'd only read Shadow and Bone and this book tour was for Crooked Kingdom. But after I got my book signed, I drew my playing card, and guess what? I drew Wylan. And so I drew the card and I was like, I don't know who this is. I haven't read the books. And she was like, that's Wylan. Congratulations, you got the last poster. And so I was like, wow, that's so exciting. That's so cool. And I grabbed the poster and continued on my way. But I kept thinking that it was so unfair for me to have gotten that last poster because I hadn't even read these books, so clearly I was not like a big fan of this series. And what I actually kept thinking was, if the roles had been reversed, if this were a Veronica Roth signing and Veronica Roth was handing out a limited amount of exclusive Divergent posters, right? And someone ahead of me in line got that last poster so that I didn't even have a chance to get that poster, and I found out that that person hadn't even read the books, I would have been pissed. So I felt like I was stealing this poster. I felt like I was taking it away from someone who's more deserving. And I understand, it's not that big of a deal. You're like, Sophia, it's just a poster. But to people who are really into their fandoms, merch is everything. Like, a Divergent poster would have meant so much to me. So I'm like holding this poster and I'm like, wow, this is a really cool poster, but like, I don't even know who these characters are on it. So I look at this long line of people who are waiting to get their book signed by Leigh Bardugo, and I spot this girl, and she is like a young teenager, and she's wearing a Six of Crows sweater, like a Six of Crows pullover. So I walk up to her and I'm like, hey, I noticed your sweatshirt. You must be a really big fan of this series. And she's like, yeah, I really am. And so I say, listen, I won this last poster, but actually I haven't even read these books, so I was wondering if you wanted to have it. I just feel like it seems like you're a really big fan, and you'll probably get more out of this poster than I can. Her eyes just light up and she's like, oh my goodness, really? Thank you. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And so I gave her the poster, and I only mentioned this story because by the time I finished reading Six of Crows, that was the only thing I could think about. I was sitting in my bed and I was like, oh my god, I understand now. I understand the value of that poster. I understand why everyone's obsessed with this book series. I had that poster and I gave it away. And I don't regret giving it away. I feel like that was a good decision, but still, it just struck me. Like, I'm so in love with this series and I want all the merch ever. Okay, story time's over. Six of Crows is the first book in a duology that's set in the same world as the Grecian universe, and this book is marketed as a heist novel. I actually finished reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy this year just so that I could read Six of Crows. If it weren't for Six of Crows, I probably never would have finished the Shadow and Bone trilogy just because I thought it was like mediocre. But because Six of Crows is set in the same world, I feel like it would benefit me to read that series first, so I did. That being said, you don't need to read the Grisha trilogy before going into Six of Crows. Reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy does give you more context. It gives you a better understanding of the world and the setting. You're more familiar with the Grisha terminology and you know the background of certain characters that are mentioned throughout the series. But really and truly, the Six of Crows duology can stand alone, so don't panic if you don't want to read those 3 books before going into this duology. You can. You'll be fine. So like I said, Six of Crows is marketed as a heist novel. The summary just tells you that there's a heist and that there are 6 different characters who are brought together to be this heist crew to complete this nearly impossible mission, and each character gets some kind of reward by completing this job. Our 6 characters are Kaz, Inej, Nina, Matthias, Jesper, and Wylan. And even though this book is marketed as a heist novel, just as a warning, only the last half of this book is the actual heist. The first half of the book is setting up the situation, familiarizing ourselves with this Grisha universe, and also meeting our characters. I've said it before, I'll say it at least a million more times in this video. I love this book. I loved it so much. Immediately when I started reading it, I got a vibe that was a mix of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn and Maggie Stiefvater's The Raven Cycle. And after finishing this series, I still stand by that. It reminds me of Mistborn because it's a heist novel and Mistborn is a heist novel. And it reminds me of The Raven Cycle because The Raven Cycle has this incredible characterization. And that's the same in Six of Crows. I can understand why this book wouldn't be for everyone. I think I can understand some people thinking that it's boring because, like I said, the first half of the book is not very action heavy. It's very, very character driven. I can also understand people thinking that this book is maybe a little pretentious because our characters are very young. They range from like 16 to 18 years old. Like the way they think and the life experiences that they've had, they just don't correlate with what we normally think of when we think of teenagers. So that's kind of jarring. Like Kaz, who's the leader of this heist crew, is so proactive and so cunning. It just doesn't feel realistic sometimes, but you know, those things don't even really matter that much to me. This book is really amazing. The best thing about this book, in my opinion, are the characters. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this book is character driven, but I did not mind that at all. Somehow, Leigh Bardugo has managed to create 6 individual, fully fleshed out, super compelling, amazingly distinct characters that move our story along. And no matter who I was following, no matter whose chapter I was reading, I enjoyed what I was reading. There are 6 main characters in this heist crew, but only 5 of them get to narrate chapters in this book. Wylan doesn't have any of his own chapters. And as you read, you get to know more about these characters, their personalities, who they are now, but also you uncover their backstories, how they became who they are now. And each character has such a complex and fascinating storyline. What's amazing to me about the characterization in this book is that each character's storyline is so distinct and so refreshing and so unique. Like when I'm writing, I have trouble creating a good storyline for a single character, let alone multiple. So the fact that Leigh Bardugo created 6, it's just so impressive. This book is so impressive. Leigh Bardugo is such a great writer, and comparing it to the Grisha trilogy, it's just so astounding that it's the same author. Not that the Grisha trilogy is bad. I'm not trying to roast that trilogy. I thought it was fine. But it's just that this book is so many worlds better. This book, I just found it unbelievably impressive. Also, Six of Crows is an excellent example of a fantasy that still manages to include a diverse cast. I see a lot of people saying that fantasy books don't need to be diverse because fantasy worlds are different than our world, fantasy races are different than our races, blah, 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 and that's such a fallacious argument. But Leigh Bardugo does it right in Six of Crows. Out of the 6 main characters we have, 1 is disabled and 2 are people of color. There are different kinds of people in every kind of world, including fantasy worlds. And I love that Leigh Bardugo includes that. The world is also super immersive. We're in a different country in this fantasy world than we are in the Grisha trilogy. And Leigh Bardugo does a fantastic job of building these settings really, really believably. I thought the writing style was great. I think the writing is definitely definitely a step up from the writing in the Grisha trilogy. Leigh Bardugo writes in a way that makes you feel very, very invested. There are parts where she employs great figurative language, and then there are also parts where she writes very cleanly and with a lot of suspense when the plot requires it. I love this book, you guys. Just so much. I love it so much. It's so good. I immediately added it to my favorites list on Goodreads. I also added Crooked Kingdom to my favorites shelf on Goodreads, just in case you were wondering how the sequel holds up. Now I'm gonna go into a spoiler section for Six of Crows, so if you haven't read this book and you don't want to be spoiled, I would advise leaving in 3, 2, 1, bye. Bye-bye. Favorite characters are Inej and Nina. I know Kaz is like the superstar of the series and has like a cult following, and in honesty, he's probably my third favorite character, but he's also too callous for me. Like, he's a very angry, vengeful, harsh, hateful boy, and I understand that he has full reason to be like that, but I also prefer characters like Inej, who have been through so much crap, but still manage to keep their spirit intact. Like, I love Inej. She's just so precious. And if I think about it, I feel like the qualities that make me like Kaz are immediate effects of being around Inej. Like, Inej is so good that she draws the good out of Kaz and brings it to the surface. I also really love Nina. Something about her that I love so much is that she's a heartrender. So her power is literally killing people, but somehow she's actually the one I feel with the most empathy for others, and I feel like she's the most concerned with saving the most lives possible. So I found that kind of ironic, but in a really pleasant way. I do think it was oddly convenient that throughout the entire book, everyone's like, oh my god, Param, it uses up the Grisha's body and it's wildly addictive after a single dose. But then the second that Nina thinks about trying it, suddenly we have this loophole. Like, oh, no, this Param is like different. It's like a variation of it, so it could not be addictive after a single dose. I was that meme where it's like, sounds fake, but okay. Matthias, I hated for so much of the book, but then somehow by the end, I loved him. Matthias and Nina are actually my favorite ship, which I think is an unpopular opinion because I hear so much about Inej and Kaz and Jesper and Wyland, and I do love those ships, especially Inej and Kaz. Like, I tweeted this, I still stand by it. But Matthias and Nina, they just do something for me. When Nina gets locked in the Grisha torture chamber and she sees Matthias going back to his former leader, like Brum or whatever his name is, I literally gasped out loud. And then I took a minute and I was like, nah, I don't believe this. Matthias is still on our side. Which he was, but for that 1 second, I was like, I've never been more betrayed by a ship in my life. Jesper was really fun. The way he kind of had a crush on Kaz made me feel really bad for him because Kaz clearly is in love with Inej, but also it made me think of the Raven cycle. Like, the dynamic between Kaz, Inej, Jesper, and Wyland reminded me vaguely of the dynamic between Gansey, Blue, Ronan, and Adam. The dynamic isn't identical by any means, but I feel like there are enough similarities present that I could form parallels. Wyland is probably my least favorite character of the six. I feel like that's not entirely like Wyland's fault. I feel like that's partially contributed to the fact that we don't have Wyland chapters in this book. But even so, even though he's my least favorite, I still liked him. I thought it was super interesting that he can read music and he can write music, like he can compose music too. And he's so good at chemistry and like all sciences, I guess, and math, but he can't read. It makes me really curious as to what parts of the brain are necessary to perform each of those different tasks and whether any of those areas of the brain overlap. Like, why can he do so many great things, but then he can't do this one task? But anyway, that's kind of irrelevant. I was like 3/4 of the way into this book when I felt it. I felt this instinct that I knew this book was going to end with our crew separated. I actually thought it was going to be Nina. I thought Nina was going to be the one separated from the rest of the crew, but it ended up being Inej. But for some reason, when I hit like 3/4 of this book, I just felt like I knew that the crew was not going to be together by the end. Speaking of the end, I was actually kind of spoiled, not intentionally, by any part of any of the parties involved. Like, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't intentionally seeking out spoilers, and it wasn't that other person's fault either. It just happened to be a spoiler for me. I saw a tweet on my timeline that was talking about villains from books, and there was a reply to that tweet that talked about Van Eck from the Six of Crows duology, and I was like, Van Eck is our villain? What? We're doing this heist for him. And so I knew that he was gonna turn on us. I knew that he wasn't gonna like hold up his end of the bargain. I knew he was gonna do something bad. And so by the end, when we got to that island and Van Eyck turned out to be this hideous, horrible person, I was like not surprised. I didn't get to feel surprised. So that sucked. It's actually really hard to talk about spoilers for Six of Crows without going into Crooked Kingdom spoilers, because there's so many things that I want to mention that happen in Crooked Kingdom, but I can't. So I think I'll just stop here. I loved this book. I also loved Crooked Kingdom. I don't know if I can decide which one I liked more. I think I liked Six of Crows a little bit more just because I didn't know what I was getting myself into, so I was so surprised. After reading Six of Crows, it was like this overwhelming sense of amazement that I loved this book so much. And so I was expecting Crooked Kingdom to be amazing, so it didn't really have the upper hand on me, you know? Because I went into this with such high expectations, I wasn't surprised when it met them, but because I didn't have expectations for Six of Crows, I was just blown away. Honestly, there's probably so much to say about Six of Crows, but all I can think of to say is, I love this book. I love this book. Over and over again. So I'm gonna just end this rambling video here. This video is such a mess. I'm so sorry. My Crooked Kingdom video probably won't be any better. Let me know your thoughts on Six of Crows. Positive, negative, I want to hear them all. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll have a fantastic day and happy reading. Bye!